Well, thanks for inviting me here. I'm Tom Delvaux. I've lived in Springfield Township my whole life. I'm a Springfield graduate. As John said, I've actually been collecting artifacts for nearly 50 years. I went to YSU. I went up there in the 1980s to take one class, and I've never left. I've been teaching there for 26 years. I started out doing archaeology projects for YSU, and then I started to teach. I've actually been there 26 years, April 1st, and I've been teaching for 25 years. And actually, this is my 25th year of teaching, and my last month. My last day will be May 2nd. I'll be done teaching. But I've been, as John said, I've been collecting artifacts for nearly 50 years. I'd like to introduce, I brought with me 3 YSU archaeologists with me today. I have Ron Madeline. All 3 are professional archaeologists, and they work all over the country on archaeology projects. Kind of a unique time right now in America. There's a lot of projects being done, and a big part of archaeology is public archaeology. It's on private projects, and that's what all 3 are doing. Ron just returned from Mississippi and Texas. We have Mitch McTighe from Poland. He's from Poland. And he's a professional archaeologist as well. And Miss Kelly Bear, she's from Ohio, a YSU graduate with a master's degree. And uniquely, she's my replacement. She'll be taking that position at YSU, which I couldn't be more pleased of. Okay? So, well, I'm going to talk about archaeology, not much anthropology. Probably one of the biggest parts of anthropology has been archaeology. We have a lot of artifacts here I've brought. Probably all the arrowheads my wife and I have collected over the years. I have some artifacts from YSU's collection. You're welcome to look at them when we're finished here. I'll talk a little bit, and then you can look over at the artifacts that we have, okay? So we're going to talk about flint tools, stone tools. It's the main artifact, the things that we find. As I said, I have quite a few. We have quite a few. They're all local, practically vast majority of them. My wife and I have hundreds. We have 100 here or so, but most of them Springfield Township, Columbiana. A lot of them from Firestone area. But on Don Snyder, Molnar's, Snykart's, you'll be recognized many of the names of the farms that many of these have been collected from. I've always gotten permission. We like when the corn comes up. It's ideal with corn because it gives you nice rows to walk and for definition. But as I said, Springfield, North Lima, and Columbiana, the vast majority, and a few of them from Mexico as well. So you're welcome to look at all of these. Okay. Before I start talking, I want to talk about something about archaeology. Archaeology, actually, we kind of study the past, but one of the biggest things we do in archaeology is we classify things. Practically every item here, we can look at it and give you an idea when it was made. And that's called, to us, it's called classification. You know, artifacts are nice. Everybody loves to find arrowheads. They're interesting, but to us, it's kind of more important, besides having the item, is knowing when it was made, and more importantly, kind of who the people were that made them. That's what we spend the biggest part of our time doing, is classifying artifacts. Here's a copy of one of our curation forms. And since 2018, our students, these in particular, have been working at the Historical Society in Youngstown. If you've ever heard about the collection, they have a 15,000 piece artifact collection that was collected in North Lima. And the owner, it's called the Calvin Collection. He died in 1991, and his family gave all 15,000 pieces to the Historical Society. And in 2018, we went over there and started a curation project, and our students have been there since 2018. They're up to about 4,000 pieces now, but they're going to go through all 15,000 pieces. One person collected 15,000 pieces in North Lima. Pretty amazing. He lived over on Brankenberger Road. He also worked for Ohio Water Service, which spent a lot of time around the lakes, so a lot of them came from that area as well. But if you can imagine 15,000 pieces by one person in one particular area, if you can imagine how many of these artifacts there are. So we spend a great deal of our time classifying things. We look at them, we measure them, weigh them, look at the color, everything about them, and really what it tells us who made them, and generally it tells us when they were made. And I'm going to talk about the different groups. Anybody, I know there's some collectors here. I have a couple hundred copies of our curation forms. If anybody would like some of them, you're welcome to take some. And you could actually classify your artifacts yourself, anything you've found. Okay? So we'll kind of look at, we generally take a photo of front and back. This one here came from Creek Road, Wayne Bacon, when Wayne Bacon owned the Firestone project down there. This was found there. As I said, everything, we kind of identify it. It gives us an idea. Both these pieces about 8,000 years old. They're bifurcates, what we call them, the way they're made. And they started making them about 8,500 years ago in Ohio. We don't know who the people were, but in this case, we know how old they are. Okay? So I'll go give you a rough idea of our time periods in America. We have three main periods of the earliest people that came to the Americas. Our earliest period is called the Paleo, and in America it kind of started about 18,000 years ago. Interesting. When I started in this business in '86, the earliest dates we had in North America were around 13,000 years ago. And it's generally accepted now that the biggest group came around 18,000 years ago. And interestingly, in the last year, the oldest date ever recorded in North America has been found in New Mexico. And that date is 23,000 years ago. They have footprints, fossilized footprints at Tularosa State Park in New Mexico that have been dated at 23,000 years ago, and it's kind of amazing. Our technology, the way it's changing, it's kind of moving that date back. But the main big body of people were kind of 18,000 years ago, and we call that the lithic. They're all kind of after lithic or stone tools, but they were broken down into different groups: Clovis people, Folsom, and Plano. Those three names are kind of all assigned to people that when you find an artifact made by them, you know who it was. The Clovis people, 13,000 to 12,000 years ago. Our second group is called the Archaic. And in America, archaeologically, the Archaic people, they're kind of like a transitional. They're halfway. They're still hunting, but all the big animals are gone. The mastodons, the mammoth who lived right here, all those big animals died off about 10,000, 9,000 years ago. And our main lithic, the big hunters are over. And we had the Archaic people. They're still hunting, but the animals they were hunting were all our modern ones. They're all modern animals that we'd recognize. And then around 3,000 years ago, a lot of those animals started to move away. It got a lot warmer around here. And our last period is really called the formative, or Archaic. Or excuse me, when we say formative, it really means agriculture in America. Because the people of Ohio and eastern United States, they were primarily agriculturalists. And we'll recognize all their names. We grow up around here, hearing them: the Adena, the Hopewell period people, in the Fort Ancient. And they were kind of all agriculturalists. So when we see artifacts, and many of these, every one of these, you pick up an artifact, you give a rough idea of who made it and when. As I said, that we spend a great deal of our time trying to figure those things out. And I'll talk about a few of these people. In the eastern United States, our people, the ones that lived right here and produced the vast majority of these artifacts, we call them the Eastern Woodlands period. People, excuse me. And really, the Eastern Woodlands, rough area. Geographically, it's the area from the Mississippi east. And really, it starts about in the lowlands of the Mississippi River drainage. It extends into Nebraska, some of the western states, just 50, 75 miles, but it's really the lowland area. And it went all the way to the Atlantic. And they're really the people, we call them, the main group, we call them the mound builders, because that's what we know about them. They built mounds, thousands of them. And there's not many of them left today. The vast majority of them are gone. But there were thousands of mounds from Wisconsin, Minnesota, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico today. And when we see artifacts, we kind of know when they were made. Our earliest people are called the Adena. About 3,000 years ago they showed up. Around 2,400 years ago, they're replaced by the people we call the Hopewell. Now the Adena didn't really disappear. What changed about them, they really still the same people, but they kind of changed their technology. And that was like 2,400 years ago. The Adena kind of switched over and they started making new types of artifacts. Still using stone tools, but they're making a more refined artifact. And we gave them the name the Hopewell. Around 1,700 years ago, 1,800 years ago, the Hopewell period ends and we get a new group of people in the Ohio area. Our main group's called the Fort Ancient. They're this area here, the Fort Ancient people, and really, they're south of us. They're south of us. We had a different group of people actually lived in our area, but each one of these areas had a different group of people in loosely related, but doing some things different. But the primary thing they did, they were agriculturalists. And everybody right away thinks about corn. Corn made their way into the eastern United States, and actually it didn't. It did, but not till about 800 AD, corn showed up. But from 3,000 years ago to about 800 years ago, the agriculturists of our area, they were growing different crops. Squash was one, maygrass, sumpweed, a lot of these things. We're familiar with them all. They're weeds that grow around here. But the Indians actually, they harvested them. The vast majority of them, if they let them grow, they'll produce a bulb. And they would open that bulb up and they'd take the seeds and they would dry them and they would make different products out of them. Corn eventually made its way here, but about 800 AD is when it showed up. And that's really kind of the last of the periods. The people that really inhabit our area right here, you rarely ever hear this word unless you take a class at YSU, but they're called the Monongahela people. The Fort Ancient people were really middle southern Ohio and southwestern Ohio, the Cincinnati area. And that's really where they lived. And everyone assumes they just covered all of Ohio. Our area here, and actually we right on the northern boundary of the Monongahela. Now, of course, it gets its name from the river drainage of western Pennsylvania, Monongahela River. Their western boundary is kind of around Cambridge, Ohio, East Liverpool, and really the northern area of it would have been around our present day, around the Beaver Creek area. Our area here, of course, has produced thousands of artifacts, and largely it was inhabited by groups. They came through here and did a lot of hunting. The river drainage is up around Cleveland, actually had in Ashtabula all the way to the west. There were large villages there, but they were generally centered around the major streams and the river drainages. So these are the main time periods that we assign all the artifacts to. Okay? I'll talk about the Clovis people. They're our earliest people in America that we call a culture. The Clovis, at one time thought to be our earliest. They kind of show up around 13,000 years ago. They made amazing spear points, 3 to 5 inches, about 1.25 inches. We have one at YSU, and this is it. Practically perfectly made. Unique thing about these, is they've always been found with mammoths. So these people were mammoth hunters. As I said, at one time thought to have been the earliest. But since that time, we've gotten a lot of carbon-14 dates, different dates that was earlier. But many, many Clovis points have been found with the bones of mammoth. This one was found by a YSU student in 1985, one of my classmates. It's a surface found from Arizona. Not a lot of topsoil out there, and many of what things that are found out there are found on the surface. But this is kind of a unique one, practically perfectly made. And the way they hunted with them was, everyone thinks they put them on the end of the spear, and some of them were put on spears. But many of them were put on darts. Now this is really a knife, but they would have, the Clovis points would have been put on a dart and attached this way. They would have been used on a spear, but they would have fit into the end of the spear. They had spears with notches on them, and the way they hunted with them, they used a thing called, it's called an atlatl. That's actually an Aztec word, but it's a device that they would hold with one hand. They would stick the spear in it, and the spear would be much longer. I didn't bring any examples, and I should have. And they would launch the spear like this, and the spear, hopefully it would hit the animal. And then they would take the spear back, or the spear would fall out. But they really didn't put their point on the end of the spear, but they would put it on a dart. A straight spear is far more valuable, if you can imagine, than a dart, because you want it to be aerodynamic. And so the idea is they used darts, and that's how they hunted. But since the 1920s, the Clovis were believed to be the first people in the America. But in the preceding years, they found out that there were other groups in here that came before them. But they were the largest group of people in America that we call a culture, even though there were small isolated groups that came before them. Always found with the bones of mammoth or mastodon. The big animals lasted in the West far longer than they did here in the East. But they made practically a perfect point. It has a little flute. You're welcome to look at it at the end, but they're, as I say, 3 to 5 inches long. One of the finest spear points made anywhere in the world. And this little flute is actually where they were able to attach it to the short darts. And our Native Americans were pretty smart. How'd they do that? They actually had, as many indigenous cultures around the world, they had glue. They made their own glues, pine tar, pine sap, and they boiled the different parts of animals, and they were able to make glue. So people were pretty industrious in the past. So the Clovis people are really our earliest dated people in North America. Here's a nice point found up in Lake County. Many of them are found broken. They break over time, and actually the hunting, a lot of them broke when they're hitting animals. These are many examples of points from the American West. So the Clovis people really our earliest main group. Here's our second group of people. The picture is actually one of the most important pictures about American archaeology, the one on the left. And it's a great story. It's a great story. The Folsom people were actually discovered before the Clovis people were. And the significance of this picture right there is this. That spear point, the Folsom people followed the Clovis. The mammoth disappeared 12,000 years ago or so, and they were replaced by the biggest animal of the day was bison. But it's not our bison of today. It was called bison antiquus. And if you can imagine, it's about 50% larger than our bison of today. They were huge. And the Native Americans in the Americas hunted them and killed them. But the mammoth's gone by this time. So they didn't need that big spear point, they made smaller ones. And the Clovis points, actually, many people call it the second grade finest spear point made anywhere in the world. And the finest one is this one here, and they're the Folsom points. Significance of this picture is this. Those two the rib bones from a bison, and they were dated at 10,000 years ago. And the spear point that's laying between them was found in 1922 by of all people, a geologist from the University of Denver, the Denver Museum. But this picture created the antiquity of the American Indian in the Americas. 1920s, the Americas. Archaeology is kind of just kind of starting out in the Americas, and a lot of other sciences as well. The Eastern museums kind of ran the history and the archaeology and anthropology departments all over America, and history societies just like this, the Smithsonian. It ruled science in the New World. And the belief of the day was Native Americans hadn't been in America but a few hundred years. Really the belief was that they came about 1000 AD. The belief was they only were here 400 or 500 years before Columbus came to the Americas. That was the belief in the 1920s. This, when it was discovered, 1922, spear point between the ribs of an animal that they knew disappeared 9,000 or 10,000 years ago. So, it's a spear point made by humans. If the animal died out 9,000, 10,000 years ago, humans had to be here. Well, the Eastern people wouldn't believe it. The museum director would not believe that it was recovered. The following year, this picture's been recreated, of course, but the following year, more animal bones, bison antiquus bones, were found, and these Folsom points were found. They left them in place. They didn't remove them from where they were cleaned off. Archaeologists from all over America were called to look at them. And a lot of work was being done in 1920s then. So these people all looked at it and they pretty much agreed that this was a natural recovery. So this picture here is what actually created the antiquity of the American Indian, the Folsom people, even though they were younger than the Clovis. The points were so finely made that you can practically see through them. As I said, we have one Clovis point that belongs to YSU. We have one Folsom point that my wife found in Columbiana many years ago. And should have opened this beforehand. Thank you. Yeah. And it's fully fluted. This point is fully fluted. They make the point, and then they knock out. This one had the Clovis point has a flute about 1/3 of the way. And the big difference between them and the Clovis, the Folsom is fluted. You can see it's the entire way. And the ones that are made from obsidian, you can shine a flashlight through them. They're so translucent. They are called the finest point made anywhere in the world. We have pieces of obsidian that are so thin you can see through them. And these points, you can practically see through these. As I said, it's created the antiquity of the American Indian. As I said, the one we found in Columbiana, much smaller than those. And the one side of it had the flute knocked out, but the other side, they couldn't. But again, there's our second culture. As I said, this picture created the antiquity of the American Indian. It was hard to believe that the belief was that it had only been here 1,000 years or so. Okay, and there's more to the story. There's more to the story. Guy on the left, his name's George McJunkin, and we can thank him for creating the antiquity of the American Indian in America, because he's the guy that discovered the Folsom people. On the right, Sally Rook. She was a telephone operator. Many of you know how phones worked back in the 50s. You had to plug the thing in to make a call, and that's what she did. That's what Sally Rook's job. Two of the most important people to North American archaeology. She died in 1908. He died in 1920 or so. I don't know if you can read this, but Folsom, New Mexico, 1908. It had rained for 2 weeks. If you've been to the American West to an arroyo, you know they can fill up with water and wash towns away, and their town did get washed away. Sally Rook was the telephone operator. She got a call that a wall of water was approaching Folsom, New Mexico, and she stayed at her switchboard and called everybody she could and told them to move. They found her body about 20 miles away, 30 feet high in a tree. She had drowned. The flood had washed away. So that's her kind of claim to fame. George McJunkin was a cowboy. He was from Texas, ended up in New Mexico. His family had been slaves. His father was a blacksmith, bought their freedom, and he was a cowboy. And after the flood, he was looking for some cows, and he was going through an arroyo. The water had subsided, and he saw bones sticking out of the side of the arroyo, and they were big bones. And he was a pretty bright guy. He had been a cowboy for 40-some years, and he knew bones when he saw them. And the bones that were sticking out of the side of that arroyo were not cow bones. They were pretty big. And he looked around, and he found some strange-looking spear points, and they were Folsom points. This is 1908, and he went to town and he told everybody what he found. He found big bones. It turned out those were the bones of Bison antiquus. And he tried to get people interested in looking over and looking for the artifacts, and nobody would. He died in either 1918 or 1920. Early 1920s, the Denver Museum heard about the McJunkin story, that he had found these big bones. And they sent people down there to look at it. And they're the ones that found that bone between, or that artifact between those two bones. So George McJunkin died, not knowing that he was actually credited with creating the antiquity of the American Indian. It says it's kind of a great story. And Sally Rook, her contribution as well. She saved nearly 40-some people that night. They were able to escape the wall of water that she couldn't. A number of years ago, the Telephone Operators Union of America collected, many of you remember this, when we used to put dimes in phones. They had a campaign because she was before payphones. She used the cord that went into this. They collected dimes. They collected dimes to establish a memorial for her. So these two people, George McJunkin and Sally Rook, are actually credited with creating the antiquity of the American Indian. Again, the idea, the Eastern elites believed that Native Americans hadn't been here very long. Okay, pretty interesting. This is our single Folsom point that we found here. The one side was able to be fully fluted, and the other side isn't. And this in itself is a great story. This artifact here, now there's many people that can map points. You know, you use whatever the tool is. I have a deer antler that people use to make arrowheads. Some people use a copper stylus, different things. This point, people from the 1920s to the 1960s could never make one. They could never recreate. Every time they tried to make the Folsom point, they broke them. There was a guy named Donald Crabtree, and he was a self-taught collector who made a lot of artifacts by himself. He was the first one to be able to make the Folsom point, and it's pretty amazing how he did it. He was reading a book about the Mayan Indians that was written by a priest, a Spanish priest. He wrote it in the 1500s. And the priest wrote down, he saw an Indian lean over, and with the force of his chest, he saw a stone break off another stone. And Donald Crabtree read that passage, and he realized, he was the first one to realize something, that the Indian that bent over and a stone flew off had a chest punch. He had a rod that had a chest punch, and the Indian must have had the piece of stone in some sort of vise. So Donald Crabtree got a regular vise like we use. He got 2 pieces of soft lead, and he put some flint in between them. He made the point first before he knocked the flute out, and then he got a copper stylus and he put on the end of a pretty substantial stick and put a piece across it. And he put that in the vise, and after a little bit of practice, he was able to recreate those. Pretty amazing. He read that couple sentences. The Indian bent over, and with the force of his chest, and he realized how it worked. So pretty amazing. Those events are actually what created the idea that American Indians have been in the Americas now, as I said, for the general main group 13,000 years ago, but now we realize the latest date, 23,000 years ago. They have 80-some footprints of juveniles. It's actually in mud flats in the past. Today the fossils are stone, they're gypsum, kind of where we get drywall from in Tularosa State Park. But 23,000 years ago, there were some people in the Americas. Okay. The Folsom people, okay. Okay. This is the bison that disappeared. This is I guess a 6-foot tall person. We had actually 5 groups of bison. Today we have bison is our main one, even though the vast majority of bison we see all over, actually, they're genetically, they're half bovine and they're half bison. We do have natural herds of bison. There's Yellowstone has in some other parks, and there's a group, a couple thousand of them up in Alaska, and Canada has bison athabascae. And that's the second genetic group of bison we have in America. It's actually called the wood bison. But we had 5 predecessors to this animal. And if you can imagine, Native Americans hunted these things. 50% larger than the bison we have today. Pretty amazing. Okay. Actually, they like to trap them. At Folsom, the belief is they trapped them in that ditch and they threw their spears from up above. Okay. Okay, we're going to, we like to play a game, at least I do. What we're going to do is this. We're going to play a game called What Is It? If you'll pass this around, you can go that way with this one. Just take a look at it and pass it around. I have a number of, they'll make their way to everybody. Okay? I go to school with you?
Yeah.
So what is it? What is it? That's what this game is. You can look at those. Anyone? This is very unique. These pictures were sent to me by Brandon Saratelli. You know Brandon. He took them on the dashboard of his van, and that's why it says Ford there. But he sent me these pictures, and he said, "What is this?" And I said, well, I've been doing this for a long time. And that is, and I had to say, I have no idea what that is. And I've searched the literature trying to find something that looks like this. There's 3 pictures of it. Everyone, if you can look at it. Anyone have an idea what it is? And I know some of you collect artifacts.
Effigy?
Pardon me?
An effigy?
That's one thought. Charm stone. Anything else? What would you do with it? That's something we do when we classify. You know, at the end of this, we have to write notes. You know, what was it used for? And that's one of the, as I said, the main things we do. But what would you do with that? Tie something to it. A weight?
It's a hook.
Sharpen a knife.
Sharpen a knife?
I'd say hang something from it.
Hang something from it? Now, a person said, no one said this yet, but bottle opener. But again, the idea is we want to know what they were used for. No idea what it's used for. I'll tell you this. This was found, the person that found this actually lives over in New Middletown on Middletown Road. It was found at Drake's Landing. You know the restaurant? Okay. Brandon and the person that found this were working on the air conditioner. And where it drains at the edge of the, wherever, they had, all around the restaurant they have washed stone. And the person was checking the end of that drain, and they saw this laying there. And they thought it's not a natural piece of stone, even though some people say that they think it is. Okay, I handed out, there's another piece there too that has a hole in it. It's kind of a square and has a hole in it. That piece was found by Brandon about 2 months later, and Brandon said it was found 2 or 3 feet from this. Now, they're trying to find out, I don't know how old Drake's Landing is, but they're trying to find out from the person that built it where they purchased the stone, the washed stone that went around it for landscaping or whatever. So that's the idea. What is it? Again, no real idea to what it is. And this is the next piece. Brandon said he found this a month or 2 later. They must not have fixed it the first time. And they found it. So what is this? What do you do with this piece? It's a kind of not the best picture in the world, but a kind of square, has a hole in it. What would you do with it?
Put it around your neck.
Put it around your neck, what?
Put a rope through it.
Put a rope through it, okay. It could be a weight. A weight. We have weights. We find weights around here. This piece right here, this is generally identified as a weight, a net, a sinker. Native Americans, pretty smart. They put weirs across streams, whatever, to catch the fish. But these are, and you can see they use this as a hammer at the end. This came from the Bacon property in New Springfield. But these are called weights. So put a string through it. People have thought that use it as a guide to push certain size sticks through, maybe an arrow or something.
Fire starter.
Fire starter? Yes. So do I. So do I. Again, and it kind of looks like a bottle opener.
Were at that time, were they using bows and arrows?
Oh,
Would they
yes,
have been used
yes.
on the?
Yes. Bows and arrows are an interesting thing in American archaeology. It's hard for anybody not to say bow and arrow, but what came before the arrow with the bow? The what? The bow and the drill. The bow and the drill. I even in my classes I say bow and arrow, and I'd say, oh, I meant to say bow and drill. Because if you take the bow and you wrap it around the stick, just wrap the string and you move the bow, then you turn this. And we have a lot of drills here. But that probably came first. It could be a weight. What is this? What is this piece? Nice back. Can you describe it?
Black.
It's black. I hand this out to my classes, and actually I give every archaeology student in the class gets an artifact of some kind, and I say, describe it. Does somebody want to describe this?
Looks like an artifact.
Flint for a muzzle loader.
And if you know what it is, don't say anything. Okay? We have 2 of these. This one comes from the Firestone Farm in Columbiana. But I would tell students, I would say describe it. Stone. It's black, but if you look at it more closely, it's kind of square. It's not perfectly square, but pretty close to square. 4 sides, and they're each kind of slanted or sloped inward to the top. And is it natural? We'd say, it could be, but more than likely not. But that's what it is. The idea, it is a piece of, It's a gun flint, and would go right there. When they had to put the powder in, they had to make the spark. It is a gun flint. Okay. And uniquely, Native Americans, I mean, and the English too, flint was in demand. And some of the earliest flints in the Americas came from England and France and Europe. It was favored for use in ships as ballast. Many of the early ships had ballast in the bottom to hold them down, and a lot of it was flint. Okay? This is another piece. That's this piece right here. Does somebody want to look at this and describe it? It's black. Okay. Is it natural, or did somebody make that? What do you think? Not to put you on the spot, but
It was made.
Nothing comes to mind.
pardon me?
Nothing comes to my mind.
Okay. What's it got though? What's it? Is there?
Well, it's flat on one side, it's got jagged edges all the way around.
Those jagged edges, the four of them, are they kind of round,
Not really.
roundish?
They're broken off a little bit. I don't think it's a flint.
Yes.
For making arrows?
Making arrows. If you look at this, there's 1, 2, 3, and there's 4 spots on it. It's broken at the bottom. It would have went on a knife like this. This would have been at the bottom. This broke off right there. And they're called spoke shaves. And this is rather big at school. I actually have a nice red YSU pencil that I get to scrape all the paint off. But that's what they were used for. Arrows, spears, anything that had bumps or marks on them, they could use these, fit these in, and they could shave them off. We call it a spoke shave. Kind of unique. Everything you find, it's kind of, you don't really know what they all are, okay? These two pieces. Natural. Is it natural? Is there another one? What's it? What would you do with it?
Hole. Drill a hole.
Yes.
Scrape.
You can scrape. That's one thing. They're actually, and they're the vast majority of scrapers that have been found in the Americas. They're kind of semicircle. We have a bag of them up here. These were actually placed on sticks like this. They're called hafted scrapers. This would have went down here, and they would have been used for a variety of reasons. Scraping things off, anything, hides, whatever it might be. Pretty unique that we need a tool. We design one, someone designs it, you get something, you buy it, whatever. They're not that much different from us. They had a lot of tools to do a lot of different projects. And that's what those are hafted scrapers. Both of those. This, is it still out? Oh, here it is. What is it? Who wants to look at it? Not to put in, anybody? Yeah, I
You already showed that.
know. Yes. What do you see? For one thing, it's not flint or chert. They're practically identical. That's a different material. That's made out of slate. That's banded slate.
Sharpener?
No, it's not a sharpener, but if you look at it, you see it has a, and actually I should say this is only half of it. This is only half. There should be another part to it. And as I said, this comes from Pine Lake Road from Don Snyder's property, but it has this smooth part through it. And if you can picture this, there's another part to it that's kind of inverse. What it is, it's a banner stone. This is what it is. It has this hole drilled through it. And this smooth part here is the hole, and it broke right at the hole. What this was used for, they went on spears. They went on spears to balance them. The Indians used an atlatl. I didn't bring one, as I said, but it's that short device. They would fit the spear into it. And aerodynamically, the spear had to travel aerodynamically. And these were moved forward or back, and that would balance the spear. And the hole was drilled through, and it weakened it, unfortunately. And that's why this broke here. It broke right at the drill hole. You know, arrowheads are nice to find. They're notched or whatever, and you know exactly what they are. But a lot of things we found that you really had no idea what they were. This thing, I didn't bring it today, but what is it? It's a shell. It's actually, it's not an artifact, but we get artifacts from this. YSU, we have been excavating. We have an archaeology site in San Salvador Island in the Bahamas. And we've been going down there since 1996. We usually go in March and December. And the Bahamas is unique. There's no stone in the Bahamas. It's limestone, organic at one time. But that's the only kind of stone that's there. We were finding artifacts, items, different things. We had no idea what they were because we had never worked with those before. And we were finding these things. And actually, they're an animal. They're a crustacean. They live in the water. They're called chitin. And what we found, they're made from 8 segments. They're kind of like armor. They've got kind of hard to tell what the nose or the tail is. One of these is a nose piece, and then there's 6 pieces, and then there's a tail. And they all interlock. And we find them, we don't find them whole like this. This was found on the beach from a living one. But this is what they are. They're chitin. And they're an animal that lives under the rocks between the wash of the beach and about 25 feet deep. And kind of the example is, things we find, if you're not familiar with something, you really have no idea what they were. And somebody had to tell us what these were. If you're on the beach in the Bahamas or Florida, whatever, and there's rocks, if you feel underneath them, hopefully there's nothing else there, you'll feel these things. And the people, we find the pieces at the archaeology site. And the significance of that tells us that that's where they were getting their food from. They were getting it from the low area of the beach to the outside.
How large is that?
This is about 3 inches. They're as this says, they're 2 to 3 inches, and this is kind of where they live. Somebody had to tell us what that was, and we got shell books and whatever. And many of the artifacts we found were made from shell, or seashells. Seashells are very hard material, but the Indians, they made their points, they made a lot of their tools out of seashell. Pretty unique. They even ground it up and put it inside their pottery, their ceramics. If you know much about ceramics, if you fire clay by itself, it won't stick together, it won't hold. But if you mix it with something, and Native Americans all over the world, they ground up stone real fine and they put it in their clay. And then they baked it, and that's what held the clay together. This is another great story. The Lucayan Indians from the Bahamas, they didn't have stone. They had seashells, though. They took the seashells and they ground it up and they used it with their clay to make their ceramics. Pretty smart to be able to do that. And if you're familiar with seashells, they're pretty hard, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine trying to break one up into little pieces that you could mix it with clay to make ceramics? Practically impossible to do. But they were able to do it, and they did something pretty smart. They took the seashells and they boiled them in fires. And they heated them in fires. And what it did was it changed the chemistry of them. and then they were able to smash them up pretty easy. You know, a lot of the things that we learn about people, you know, you wonder how they do that, you know, the old idea that aliens came and showed them, really not true. But give people a chance, as we know, you give people a chance and they'll figure out a way to do things, and that's what they did. A lot of these items, they modified something for their use. Okay? Here's some items we have you're welcome to look at. Here's a matati. This comes from a cave in Utah. This cave produced about 23 of these. It's called Hog Up Cave. One of our professors at YSU brought it. But 6,000 years ago, the Indians, the Utah Indians, their ancestors, they ground pickleweed on this. And they turned it into flour, and they turned it into tortillas. This is a mortar. This one actually comes from Poland, and people used it to break nuts apart. I brought walnuts off my wife and I, and this kind of goes with it. Even though this was not found with this, but it's a pestle. It's called a bell-shaped pestle because it kind of looks like a bell, and it's used two ways. You can either hold it like this and you can smash nuts. And Native Americans didn't use walnuts. Around here they used butternuts and hickory nuts, but they didn't really like the little use of the walnut, maybe because of the black walnut, of the stain. But you can smash them like this, or you can hold it this way. But it just works pretty, and that's how it works. I really don't know where this one came from, but a mortar and pestle, found many places. Okay? Some other things we have here. These are gorgets. They're called gorgets. We have a couple of them. Both of these come from North Lima. But if you see them in all the old movies, the Native Americans, they have like armor, breastplates, or whatever, but they could have been used that way. Different items. Everybody likes to look good. We like to look good today, and people did in the past as well. But they're made from slate, and they're both drilled. There's 2 holes drilled in each one. And they're unique about the drill, because if you look at how the holes are drilled, they're conical the way they go down. They don't have drill bits like ours that drill straight through something. They're sloped. We have a lot of drill bits here, and they're kind of angled. So they had to drill the hole from both ways. They drilled it from both ways. This is at Clovis Point. This is it's called an archaic knife. A lot of people look at it and say, oh, the thing's broken. But really it's not. It's made this way. This would have went on a hafted stick, and they could cut with any of the sides. This was found on the Smith farm up at South Range in Unity. Here's drills, broken. Vast majority of them are broken at the bottom, but they would have, you would have hafted them on a stick, much like this one is. You can't see it here, but this is corner notched. And then I used a shoelace to tie on here as an example. This comes from the Pine Lake Road over in North Lima. It's about 8,000 years old, made by we called them the Kirk people. But this is just an example. These are drills. Here's a lot of stem points. They're just stemmed. Many tools are corner notch. It's just a different way of attaching them. Stem tools are much older than the corner notch. If you look at this, you can just see where the corner comes out on it. Okay. Here's 2 bifurcates. Both of these, Creek Road and Columbiana. Bifurcates are pretty old as well. They predate the corner notching. They start showing up about 9,000 years ago. For whatever reason, the people started making bifurcates, just the 2 little pieces. And here's corner notch, nice couple tools. What are they? What would you use those for? If you look at them real close, we have a few here, but those are, another nice word for those would be their steak knives.
Yeah, they're serrated.
They're serrated,
Yeah.
and believe me, they will cut you, this one especially. but they're serrated. They can, so steak knives, just like ours, just like ours. Here's a couple, this comes from Hoffman Farm over on South Range Road, but they're called arcade bevels. We only have a few of them, and they're kind of unique. If I find them here, where are they? They are right there. If you look at them, can you describe it?
I can't see.
Here, look at it.
Slopes.
What's unique about that?
It's got a twist to it.
It's twisted. This slope on this side is slanted this way. The slope underneath is slanted that way. That's pretty smart. And these were used as drills as well. And the thought is they were used for very drill big items. But that's pretty smart to drill something that way. Just like the angle on the end of our drill bits. We have 13, 18, 25 degrees, whatever the drill angle is. They're called archaic bevels, but this tool was made deliberately that way. As I said, we only have a few of them. But that's pretty unique to design something that way, to have this slope there and this one over there, and they would have been used in a drill. Pretty smart. Okay. And, okay. Axes, granite, whatever they are, vast majority of them broken. I have one example here. Now this is the axe. Now I put it on this stick just for display purposes. But they cut trees. As I said, they don't have chainsaws like we have, but they were able to cut trees. And especially 3,000 years ago when the agriculturists show up and they start building big lodges, they built their houses pretty unique. Our walls are what, 16-inch on center, single 2x4 usually, 16, 24-inch or whatever. They built their houses, they doubled 2 trees together. And many of the trees were 2.5 or 3 inches in diameter. Be pretty hard to cut a big oak tree or whatever it is that's 8, 10, 12, 16 inches in diameter. That would take a great deal of work. So they figured out that they would join 2 saplings together a few inches apart and about a foot apart. And that's how they built the walls of their structures. And they went up pretty high. They went up pretty high, and they built them in stages. They made like bunk beds going up, and then when they got to the top, they tied them over. They've been recreated many, many ways. Many of the parks where their houses are found, post molds, those dark stains in the earth are found, and they're very close, 2, 3, 4 inches in diameter. It's far easier to cut a smaller diameter tree than a big one. And these things, they will cut. They will cut. And axes, fully grooved axes. They went grooved all the way around, for different ways to have them. You could put them in the V and then tie the ends of a limb around. As I say, these come from South Range Road as well, the old Hoffman place over there. Okay, these are both. This thought to be a weight, even though you can see that it looks like it was pecked on the end. This is another. This is another pounding stone as well. It has this line around it where it would have been hafted onto something. This is a lot easier to open. Now, many people have looked at this and they thought, oh, this thing got caught in a disc or something, and that's what made their line around there. And it would be. I would think that too if it was perfect all the way around, but it's not. It's an irregular line, and somebody spent a lot of time making this line around there, whether to tie something around it, whether it was a stick to go on it, or maybe a string to use it as a weight, but as I said, many of these have been found, and the belief is they're deliberate. Okay. This is it's a sickle. A lot of archaeology sites produce these little square stones, and they couldn't figure out what they were for. But then they realized that they cut a lot of grass, corn, a lot of our products today. All those things started out as wild grass, and people, they use these little square pieces. I put them in this stick just to show my classes, and I use some glue to glue it in there. But this cut a hole. I have a container here of bearded wheat that came from Don Snyder's farm. It took about 15 minutes to cut it, but they needed a tool. They needed a tool, and they made it. And stone was their primary item, and the vast majority of the tools they made, they figured out a way to make them out of stone. Here's a lot of the scrapers. The vast majority of scrapers we find, they're broken, but they're small, and you can use them for cutting, scraping hides, doing whatever, shaving. As I said, there's a dart I made. Okay, and this is an example. The Kirk Point, about 8,000 years they started making these. I found this over in, as I say, on Pine Lake Road in North Lima, that it's practically perfect. But it is corner notched, and I just put it on the stick to show people how it was worked. And you can see that I used that spoke shave to shave off some of the sides of this. Any questions? Here's a couple pieces of obsidian. Now this, I got it right outside Mexico City. Both of these pieces came from Teotihuacan. It's those, if you ever see pictures of those two huge temples, they're just north of Mexico City. That's where they came from. And that's the unique thing. Obsidian, those temples were built on top of volcanic tubes from the mountain there. It's actually called Cerro Gordo, bless you, fat baby. And people went there for obsidian. This piece is pretty unique. It's found in one spot at Teotihuacan and underneath one temple. And it's similar to something we have in North America. If you look at it in the light, it's kind of yellow. Now we have pyrite, fool's gold, and this has a lot of yellow in it. But it was found underneath one temple there called the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, which is really some sort of religious structure. The belief is it was used for some sort of religious, but it has a lot of yellow specks in it.
Yeah.
As I say, we know what a lot of things are, but not everything. This is a Hopewell point. YSU found this back in the 1980s. They excavated a spot down by Cincinnati, but it's made by the Hopewell people. What's so significant about this is it's perfectly made. It really could be in a museum somewhere, but it's made from Flint Ridge flint. Flint Ridge, Ohio. It's down by Newark, which is way east of Columbus. That was found way west of Columbus, about 180 miles from the quarry it came from. Unique thing, all the flint in America, every deposit seems to have a different chemical composition. It's all been mapped. So this piece was found about 180 miles from this quarry. That's a long ways for that piece of flint to get there. And how did it get there? Unique thing about Flint Ridge flint is it's one of the nicest flints in America. If you heat these in a fire, they change colors. There's reds, pinks, there's blacks, there's yellows, all sorts of different colors. And many knappers and Indians in the past, they heated their flint. It made it far easier to knap. A lot of people don't think they're just breaking apart these pieces of cold stone. But reality is they heated it, just like heating that seashell to break it up into dust. They changed the chemistry of it. But Flint Ridge flint, the Hopewell people, and the big difference between them and the Adena that came before them, they started trading all over the country. Ohio, they found shark teeth, grizzly bear teeth, copper from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, steatite, schist from all over the country. And the idea is the Hopewell people, they were part of a big trade network all across the country. So I say, so this Flint Ridge, along with another type called Texas alabate, it's from Texas, of course, and it's found all over for whatever reason. Flint Ridge in Ohio, Texas alabate, Ron's seen it in Texas. It was, people wanted to have it. I don't know, whatever it was something pretty popular. And here, this piece, we only have one of these. I didn't pass it around. But what is it? It's pretty sharp. What's it look like?
Cutting grass,
Cutting
grass.
cutting grass, cutting something. This is a piece of, this was found near the railroad tracks down at Creek Road by, on Wayne Bacon's property. It is the only piece of obsidian we have at YSU. The closest obsidian to Columbiana is Yellowstone National Park. There's some in New Mexico too, but there's black obsidian in Yellowstone. That's a long ways. It's a long ways from Yellowstone, and it's found in Columbiana. So think about it. How did it get there? Just like Flint Ridge, Flint showing up in Texas, California, Maine, 180 miles away. So pretty unique. It really shouldn't be there, but it is. More than likely it came in the past. Okay? And here's just a collection. Here's a knife. Paleo knife, they're called. They're found all over. Okay. Here's some different tools as well. The Snipecart Farm in New Springfield. Anybody collect artifacts? Just walk around, you know, kind of look, pick things up. You got to pick them up to see. I said, been doing it for 50 years, and some days you don't find anything, some days you do. Okay.
Excuse me, but.
Yes.
Tom Coke
Yes.
used to collect arrowheads.
I walked on Tom's property down there too. Yes.
Well, he farmed the bait farm in the Middletown.
Yes.
He found a lot of them there. I think Kim has his collection. He'd be up in that big tractor and be plowing, and he could see an arrowhead from up there.
There's men. I know several farmers. George Houck does that.
Oh, yeah.
He can spot them from the seat of his tractor.
And I've walked that field several times and haven't found any.
Keep walking. Keep walking. And walk right after a
Oh,
rain.
yeah, yeah, that right after they plow and.
Your feet have to be
Okay.
muddy.
Yes. Any questions, comments? Yes.
Okay, you found an arrowhead. How do you know if it's a real one or somebody just did it?
You know, that's a good question. You don't really know, but if you find him in a field, you can generally think. Now in Ohio, we have two books. They're produced by Bob Converse. He's dead. He belonged to the Ohio Archaeology Society, but he was kind of like the dean. We use these books. We find an arrowhead. Practically everything that's found in Ohio, you can find in this book. That's how we found this gun flint, and we knew, kind of told us, we learned from this book. It's in the very last page. Everything else in this book is prehistoric. And these gun flints were made by Native Americans, but they were also made by the English and French that came to this country, because their guns used them. But practically any stone tool, anything that is found, you can find in one of these books. And they generally date them and whatever. But you're right. You don't know. Now people are producing artifacts. One of the best flint knappers I ever saw in 50-some years lived in Canfield. He's now dead. He could make arrowheads, spear points. You couldn't tell them from an original one that you found somewhere. People soak them, they soak them in chemicals and different things that ages them. What some people will do is they'll take an artifact, arrowhead, and they'll break it. And they'll look at it under a microscope to see if any of the stone has absorbed, how long it's laid in the ground or whatever. Most stone, it would be pure inside, but people that want to sell them on the antiquities market, they soak them in a lot of different things to age them. One of the things that binds us, we all belong to ethical groups, but we do not buy or sell artifacts. We're kind of not allowed to do that. There's an amazing field of purchase. People want these things. You go to eBay or whatever, you type anything in, the name of any of these things, and you can find them on eBay. And of course, we have whole governments doing that as well. You know, the British Museum is full of not the British, but nothing in there's British. It's the biggest set, the greatest set of Adena and Hopewell artifacts from Ohio is of all things in a museum in England. We had two guys in Ohio called Squire and Davis. In the 1840s, they were the first people hired by the Smithsonian Institution, and their job was to map the mounds. And they did. And they did such a great job. Their dimensions, their measurements are still used today. Drew great pictures. They also collected artifacts. 1849, it was published by the Smithsonian. The first publication by the Smithsonian was these two guys from Ohio. Anyways, they tried to sell their collection of Adena and Hopewell artifacts to the Smithsonian Institution for like $5,000. It was huge. They didn't want it. And a guy from England bought it. So the biggest collection group of Ohio artifacts it's not in the British Museum, but it's in another museum. Many years ago, wrote to one of our politicians in Ohio, and I mentioned that fact. Boy, it should be nice to get those back, but I've never heard anything. But all around this, I mean, there's an unbelievable trade in artifacts. As I say, we don't do it. To my knowledge, we have some pieces here that are recreated. These are molded after the two examples are in the vaults at the Historical Society. And there's a few items here that are cast, and I will tell you that. Here's a needle. It's modeled after an 8,000-year-old needle that comes from Montana. Here's a fish hook, and the fish hook itself is a cast. But it is tied to a real deer tarsal to show you where the Indians made it from. But again, the idea is we do not trade in items that are bought. And yes.
As I told you, my dad belonged to the Ohio Anthropological Society.
Bob Converse was the president for 30, 40 years down there.
Growing up on Sunday afternoons, we'd be taking a ride out through Columbiana County, Mahoning County, whatever, and Dad said, "Oh, there's a mound." And I don't know how many times he did that, but how common were mounds in the area?
There were a lot of mounds here. Actually, we have a map at YSU that lists many of the early mounds. In the early 1800s, farming destroyed the vast majority of them. The continued farming, even over a mound, has a tendency to slump them. The mounds themselves would just slump out, and that's what happened to many of them, and many of them were leveled. The north side of Youngstown, where Wick Park is today, there were a number of mounds up there, and they're shown on a lot of the earlier maps. And no, not to say anything about the farmers or whatever, but they had no idea, no thoughts about preserving anything like that. So just through the natural farming, the vast majority of mounds have been eliminated. There are a few remaining. The Conus Mound in Marietta, right in the middle of the cemetery, best thing they ever did was put a cemetery around it, because nobody's really done anything to it. We have a few places. Fort Ancient has the earthworks, 3¼ miles of earthworks. Moundsville, the Grave Creek Mound down in Moundsville, West Virginia. We go there a couple times in the year. It's the largest Adena mound left in the world, and it's still there, and it's pretty much intact, but they think there was 5,000 or so.
What was the purpose of the mounds, and was there anything in them?
Oh, yes, they were full of, they started out burial mounds. Around 5,000 years ago, before the mound builders, the Archaic period, people started to do two things. They started to build houses, and they didn't build mounds, they started to bury their dead. And the belief is this: when people start burying their dead somewhere and build houses, they're digging in. They're not leaving. So the idea is that they started to build mounds. And the unique thing about most of the mounds were they're in very noticeable places. The ones that remain in a Great Serpent Mound, Fort Ancient, they're on high bluffs by rivers, creeks, whatever. The idea is people, they see those. They're like billboards. Somebody lives here. When they see the mounds, they had an idea these areas are occupied. And who's in the mounds? They're your people, your ancestors. You bury them on land that they lived their lives on or whatever. So the idea is the mounds start showing up slightly before the mound builder period, around 5,000 years ago. But they coincide with cemeteries and houses. And culturally, they kind of go together. Good question.
Thank you.
Anything else? I mean,
Are there any mounds found in this Springfield Township?
to my knowledge, no. Even though everybody that sees a piece of a little slope somewhere that calls us and wants us to go dig them, and we don't. We don't like to do burials anymore. We have done burials. We've moved, to my knowledge, 2 cemeteries. We do that. People call us all the time, and many of the Ohio Indians buried their people under big rocks, pieces of stone. And people find big flat rocks, they kind of think it's an Indian burial. Many people call us, and we really don't do that anymore. We tell them call the coroner, whatever. Well, actually, that's the first thing we do. If we find a human remain or bone of any sort, and we've done this, Mr. Kennedy, we call the coroner, Dr. Kennedy. You have to notify him that you found a human remain, because they have to look at it, and then they just call us and tell us to go.
Did I understand that there is a mound in one of the cemeteries in Youngstown?
There was.
There was?
Yeah, the north side of Youngstown had a number of them. The Wick house destroyed one of them, the Wick log cabin that's up there. But they're marked on the maps. They're all gone now. Houses were built in those places. Interestingly, our closest, largest deposit of flint, Plum Run, it's in Alliance on Jennings Avenue, right underneath that industrial park that's there, and it was destroyed. It happens a lot. We have the Salamander Mound in southern Ohio. It's privately owned. There's a housing development built around it. Great thing. Built a road around it, they protected it. And they've kept it protected all these years. The mounds, many of them, people, when the first people came here in late 1790s, early 1800s, the mounds were decimated. People were looking for gold, silver. One mound in Ohio produced silver to anybody's knowledge, the Site Mound in southern Ohio. But people were looking for things of value. And that was about all there was, as I said. But stone tools or whatever. The first great archaeological question in America was the mound builder question. The first time money was appropriated for anything was to answer the mound builder question. And people wondered, who built the mounds? We had Indians living right here. And the general view then was Native Americans, they weren't very intellectual, engineering, they weren't well thought of. And there's no way that these Native Americans here could have built the mounds or known the mound builders. The general belief was that the Indians had come here and they'd forced the great people that built the mounds, forced them to Mexico, where they built the monumental architecture that's down there. And that was the belief. in the early 1800s. The first time money was appropriated by the Smithsonian we would call it entitlement money today, but they appropriated $5,000 to answer the mound builder question. And they hired a historian from Illinois, Powell, and actually he was a racist. He hated Native Americans. And it was his job to answer the mound builder question. But I'll say this for him, he kind of was a true scientist. They excavated many mounds. They found ceramics, stone tools, and they found bones. And they compared them to the tools Indians were using all over the East, and they were still using stone tools, still using ceramics, and their physical remains matched the remains that were found in the mounds. So Powell actually said that, without question, that it was the ancestors of Native Americans that built the mounds. Kind of neat. Last thing I'll say is, unfortunately, it really didn't change the perception we have of Native Americans in the Americas. And unfortunately, some places it hasn't changed. Any questions? Other questions?
Oh, what Indian tribes, do you know what Indian tribes were here?
Yes, many, I don't know. The belief is that the Delaware were around Cambridge, around the Beaver Creek area. They were the people that, as far south as, if I pronounce this correct, Ganeda Hutton? They lived in that area. Slightly to our east in Pennsylvania, there were some Mingo groups. There was another tribe in the Monongahela area called the Monacans. They were from Virginia. They had been forced off of one of our early presidents' vast plantations, and they moved back there. Thomas Jefferson's, they live there today. But there's the Tuscaroras, the Shawnee. At the historic period, the Shawnee were in southwestern Ohio. As you know, of course, in 1830, they were packed up and moved to Oklahoma. This is another great story. They're back. They're back. In the last 5 to 10 years, they've started coming back to Ohio. YSU excavated a sun serpent in southern Ohio, down by Fort Ancient. It's a summer solstice sunset marker. And I have pictures of it. It'd take me a while to dig them out. But every year, June 21st, on the summer solstice, it's a sunrise marker, 1,000 people show up there, and more of them are Native Americans now. Native Americans have also retaken over the Great Serpent Mound down in Locust Grove, Ohio. They have a number of events there. There were many of them coming back from Oklahoma, where they were forced to in 1830. So there's kind of a lot going on. Some groups are opposing them. It's a great story. Other questions?
Clovis.
Clovis.
I can remember as a kid, back in the 60s, these dates me quite badly. Clovis spearheads were found the banks of the Columbia River.
Yes.
And they were, I can remember they're talking about 10 or 12,000 years. It was a big thing nationally.
Yes. Apple orchard, right off the Columbia River. And I didn't bring it, but the Columbia River, you've heard of Kennewick Man?
Yeah.
Kennewick Man, he was found in the Columbia River. A lot of places, I was at Ohio State a couple of months ago, I took the skull. I could have brought it, but Kennewick Man, that's a whole great story in American archaeology. Clovis people always associated with mastodons. Folsom people always associated with bison and tickless. When that big bison disappeared, what we had in America was bison, the one we have today. And also, their tools changed. The big spear points, they weren't being made anymore. They quit making them. Every time the animals changed, people changed their tools. Kind of unique. They didn't need the big spear points anymore. And any other questions? I have yes.
Can you read that? I can't.
So what's this? I asked for a hammer. This is a crescent wrench. Maybe it's a hammer. Damn these stone tools. As I said, we don't know what everything is we find, but I have a number of other lectures. I'll let you know, I lecture Salem, Youngstown Libraries, Ohio State every 4 or 5 months, and I do the Peopling of the Americas. It's about an hour long if you ever wanted to see it, but it starts in Asia about 28,000 years ago. We end up right here in Ohio. I do the Wounded Knee. Anyone know this?
Yes.
There's 2 stories there. No politics. There's a battle or a massacre. One or the other.
It depends on who wins.
Pardon me?
Depends on who wins.
Well, we know who won, but there's another story to it. And I do Pleistocene extinctions. I'm doing this in January. I'll be at Ohio State in Canfield. January or February. Who killed Blue Babe? She died 31,000 years ago. She was killed by an American lion. You can see the claw marks. Not a mountain lion, an American lion. We had lions just like Africa. I do the African burial ground. Biggest bioarchaeology project in America. 427 burials. Now, they were building a skyscraper and they were underneath them. And they moved every one of them. And this is kind of for archaeology students. A lot of people questioning what we do today. There's a big movement in American archaeology about decolonization, whatever it might be. So some people, I do the Day of the Dead.
Yay.
Pretty interesting. This is our excavation site. These are veterans of many years in the Bahamas. These are the people that met Columbus. And the people that welcomed Christopher Columbus and discovered the Old World. Most of the books that are written said about Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. And I kind of turned it around, kind of as a little pun. I thought you would like this one. You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. No, not that one. We'll have the Historical Society after us. I guess that's Godzilla. Is that the Japanese one? Gamora, whatever. Any other questions? Yes. What?
Oh, no, go ahead.
This is a little off the subject, but the pyramids in Egypt, recently they've had speculation